Oh dear, we're literally 5 minutes into our tramp. We're waist deep in a flooded river. The main swing bridge onto the track has been washed away by a flood that's closed all of the other national parks in the area. I'm starting to wonder if this is such a good idea. This is a survival story, not mine, but rather a community that needed to reinvent itself in order to survive. And it's set here in a remote southwest corner of New Zealand. We've just left our pre-tramp accommodation on the outskirts of a little settlement called Tuatapere. Population 500. Like many small remote towns, they're doing it pretty tough at the moment. On a good day, you might be able to find a cup of coffee, a warm pie, and an information centre. On the outskirts of town, there's a sign that welcomes you to the sausage capital of New Zealand. The only problem is that the last butcher in town closed its doors a decade ago. This is a story about this community's fight for survival. Not only are they the staging point for one of New Zealand's great walks, but they're also the reason why it exists. A few k's into the trip and the bridge has been damaged by a big storm. There's been a lot of rain lately. The water is flowing pretty fast and deep. It gets a bit dicey in the channels. It feels like it might have been safer going across the bridge. Or maybe not. We head along the low tide beach before joining the track into the forest. Tuatapere relies on the good old basics like sheep and deer and forestry for its income. So when the Forestry Service pulled out in the 80s and people started leaving the region because there wasn't any work, then they started noticing things like emergency services having to close down, and community clubs and groups started to find it harder to attract members. The town could see that their future was at risk and that nobody was really stepping in to help them out. So they banded together and they came up with a great plan to build a world-class hiking track and lodges right on their doorstep. One problem though, they didn't have permission to do it. We've been keeping an eye on the weather, and we know the weather is going to be a factor on this hike.
Well, there's blue sky, it's spitting with rain, the cold wind's gone, it's warming up slightly.
Definitely glove weather though, right?
Yeah.
And beanie weather.
I've got 4 layers on. I've got a thermal top, a light windbreaker, a puffer jacket and a raincoat.
So much better than the 3-wire one.
Just gonna go and get a drink.
We stopped for a billy of fresh water from a stream. What does it taste like, Kim?
Now I might get a mouthful. Icy cold river water.
Every good hike needs a challenging climb.
Going. Legs are weary. We're probably about halfway up.
Slowly grinding out the stairs. The community's plan was to build the track on Department of Conservation land. But at the time, no individual person had ever been given a concession by the Department of Conservation to build tracks or structures on Department of Conservation administered land. So the project had to begin with 2 years of negotiation with the Department of Conservation to try to get a concession for them to build the track. And it was only after that concession was won that the real challenge of putting 60 kilometres worth of track and lodges into a part of the country that is pretty much inaccessible began. At the top, we're rewarded with views as far as the eye can see, which isn't that far.
Look at you two at the top, ish.
The climb is enough to put us in the snow above the tree line. It's bitterly cold, and without the exertion of the climb, my body temperature starts dropping. I really should have added a couple of wool layers before the top.
Hiking luxury. We did it the hard way. We brought our packs with us.
You can actually get your pack helicoptered up here. What a great idea.
And we said, what's the view like from our bedroom?
It's pretty cold out there. Snow on the ground, freezing. We are going to take these tokens and convert that into a apparently hot shower. Let's find out.
Hot shower after a cold wintry walk. Luxury.
We wake up to a stunningly clear day. We drop our packs and go for a short walk above the hut through the alpine tarns. It's about minus 10 degrees up here. Barely holding on. Wishing that you had some gloves on. Show us your hands. Bit pink. Yeah.
Betsy's like, can I get in trouble shortly when I've got hypothermia?
I'll give you a cuddle. With the clouds gone, we get to more fully appreciate the view that yesterday's climb had earned us. Okaka Lodge is set up with a little shop. You can buy a bottle of wine, and you can even rent a hot water bottle for the evening. Okaka Lodge sits high up on the ridgeline. Building it was quite a mission. It was done over a winter. All the materials had to be brought in by helicopter, porta-com, building materials, water, all the rubbish taken away. Even food for the people that were building it. Tuatapere is lucky to have a long association with some of the best helicopter pilots in New Zealand due to their proximity to the remote wilderness of Fiordland and their normal business of ferrying hunters out into the backcountry. The lodge wasn't even the hardest job that the helicopter pilots had to do. Back with our packs, we head along the boardwalk. We follow it along the mountain ridge. The local community has done a huge amount of work upgrading this track. Huntbridge is famous for its boardwalks. They take you over sensitive wetlands and they make your walk a little bit more comfortable when you're going across some of the tree root segments along the ridge. They represent a big part of the cost of the track, so the Tuatapere Trust decided that they would build the boardwalks themselves. They assembled a group of volunteers, put them in town in a workshop, brought in local timber, and within 28 days the group of volunteers had assembled 7 kilometres of boardwalk, which the helicopters then barged out to Port Craig and then lifted out onto the ridge and over to the wetlands.
Wouldn't take so.
Lots of boardwalks, but I'm not bored.
We descend towards tonight's destination, surrounded by mixed old-growth forest. We stop for lunch and were joined by a curious robin. Definitely got his eyes on the rat. How was the ridge? The ridge had a couple of ups that were a little bit tiring and lots of steps down. And we've got an easy, cruisy couple of hours to Port Craig. follow old railway lines going over viaducts built in the old logging days. It's easy going.
Let's go swim down there.
The railway lines and viaducts in this area mark an earlier chapter in this region's fight for survival. In the 1800s and 1900s, this area was home to a significant logging industry. The bush that we've just walked through was filled with giant totara and rimu and matai trees. And these viaducts and railways were used to transport that timber to the nearby settlement of Port Craig. And this is where the logging railroad terminated. Port Craig, a small town on the edge of a wilderness. Conditions here were pretty harsh. Heavy rain, not that warm, absolutely relentless sandflies. There's a story that if you were a young fellow up on charges in front of the district magistrate, that you'd sometimes be given a choice of 6 months in prison or 6 months earning a wage at Port Craig. A few unlucky souls chose Port Craig. We drop our bags at tonight's hut. We're told that there are Hector's dolphins down at the beach. We catch a glimpse of a dorsal fin. Just a glimpse.
It's a southern ocean, it's chilly.
It's pretty cool, isn't it?
But we've got 2 Hector dolphins, very Hector dolphins here.
Where else can you make a snowman in the morning and swim with dolphins in the afternoon, eh? Day 3 and we're back on the track, back in lowland bush. There's a bit more beach tramping, with Rakiura's outline in the distance. We're doing about 20 kilometres of walking a day, but we don't stop often. Whenever we do, we're joined by unwelcome guests. The sandflies here have no respect for personal space. And we're back to the first day's bridge. The water is receded, it's a lower tide, and we're a bit more experienced at picking the right paths. And we're back to civilization. In 2024, the Humpridge was upgraded to New Zealand Great Walk status. Every year 4,000 people walk the track, people like me, people who come to see the landscape and get a sense of the southern spirit. And we're able to do it because of a small community's collective efforts to create a future for their town.